Okay, so welcome to Coastal Corals, everyone. Now, hopefully everyone can see that screen. Firstly, we'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country on which we're hosting this event. For us, it's the Gubbi Gubbi or Kabi Kabi people. Depending on where you're coming from, you'll have obviously a different Indigenous peoples that are your traditional owners, but we pay our respects to all elders past, present and emerging. So tonight we have the wonderful Vicky talking to us about the effects of climate change induced sea level rise on mangrove forests. I think that's quite prudent given all the changes that are going on around the coast at the moment. So who is Reef Check? I guess most of you have heard of us, but we are a not-for-profit and we train both recreational divers to become citizen scientists and people who don't dive but still want to become involved to become ambassadors, and then we can help educate the communities on what they can do to help make a difference in protecting our oceans, whilst our survey divers go out and collect reef health data. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping. We'll just leave our videos off except for when we do the photo. That just helps with the bandwidth. And if we can just keep our microphones on mute, please feel free to use the chat. If you've got any questions, we'll put them in the chat box and then we can ask Vicky at the end about those. If you're not on our mailing list and would like to receive our monthly newsletter, if you just send an email to myself at seqsurveys@reefcheckaustralia.org, I can put you on that mailing list and you'll get a monthly newsletter, let you know what we've been up to and what's coming up in the future. We will do a group photo and Erlen will do that for us in a moment. Upcoming events. On Sundays, we have raffles at Your Mates Brewery, which is really awesome because Your Mates give us some prizes and we go in and sell raffle tickets and all proceeds go to Reef Check. So the next one of those is on Sunday the 12th of June and then again on the 24th of July. There's a musician plays some awesome tunes and last Sunday that we were there, it was really hectic. It was so crowded. It was really awesome. Lots of people having a very good time. I believe the schnitties are pretty good too. Prana Fest, that's coming up at the end of May. That's a wellness retreat. It's like a camping event out at Baromba Deer Park. Lovely spot out there. You can see platypus in the creek. It's really lovely. Bit chilly for swimming, I believe. World Environment Day. It's actually a month-long program this time. So that goes on for a whole month. Check out that website, see what's going on there. Ocean Film Festival, for those who didn't catch it on the Sunshine Coast, it is again, it's on in Brisbane on the 16th of June. There were some really awesome films. I actually went to the one in Noosa. Well worth checking them out. Each film is only short, but it's really inspiring. And then if you did want to get involved, we have a couple of ways. We have ambassadors who man our stalls at events, help run these coastal coral talks. And then we also have our divers who go out, as I say, and monitor the health of our reefs. But you can check out the website to see what prerequisites there are. Being ambassador is, well, pretty easy. You don't need too much. To be a diver, there are some specific requirements. So if you have a look on the website, and then again, you can send me an email. I can help you out if you want to know what's going on there. You can follow us on Facebook and all those social medias. As I say, sign up for our newsletter if you'd like to receive that. And then these events are actually made possible by support from granting bodies such as Sunshine Coast Council, Gold Coast Council, Port of Brisbane, Townsville Council, and the Clean Water Group support us with the Zoom account to enable these talks to happen online. And then, as I said, we actually have a team that hosts these events. A couple of our people are away this month, but there's a group of us help put these events together and then run them each month. And of course, we need everyone to help make them happen. And so tonight, Vicky is going to tell us all about her work on mangroves and why she's sitting on a plank of wood in amongst those reed beds. So I won't read through that because you would have already read about her when you booked for the talk. And that's it. So I will stop sharing my screen. And we might get everyone to turn your videos on if you like, and we'll get Erlen to take a photo.
Pretty faces.
Where's Karen? There's Karen.
Karen. All right. Oh, there's more people.
Okay.
All right. Everybody smile.
Thanks,
Thank
Erlen.
you.
So if Vicky would like to share her screen, and she can take it from there.
No dramas. Thanks, Julie.
Excellent. That's good.
Right. So you can just see the screen, the main title show there?
Yes, yep, that's great. Thank you.
Not a problem. So yeah, so I'm a member of the UQ Marine Ecology Lab, we call ourselves. We're enthusiasts about the intertidal wetlands, mangroves, salt marshes, seagrass, anything that gets us out and about in the field, really. And we study a wide range of projects. So we're at UQ. Professor Catherine Lovelock, many people might have heard of her. She sort of runs our crew in a way, and we lead off of her as examples in a way. So yeah, just like to talk about the research. So I've actually been doing this research now for 14 years. I started this looking at sea level, the effects of surface elevation in mangroves and salt marshes. And yeah, I'll just present to you what we've got so far, even though, yeah, we're still in the way. So let's start with why should you care about, or how can I convince you to care about coastal wetlands? So they provide more than a quarter of the biosphere ecosystem services, including erosion control and the protection from storms and waves. They enhance water quality by filtering out sediments and nutrients from creeks and rivers. And they're well known as nurseries and for provisioning habitats for marine fauna with a wide range of crabs, invertebrates, and fishes, calling these wetlands their home. So this is one of the many links of mangrove ecosystems to coral reefs, and without these intertidal communities where fishes are in nurseries, many of the fisheries would crumble. And more recently, wetlands have been recognised as important environments for terrestrial fauna, as feeding grounds and more nurseries, refuge, shelter. And this includes the kangaroos, the koalas, bats, and even there's a false water rat that lives out in the wetlands. And globally, a wider range of terrestrial animals utilise mangroves, including tigers, monkeys, and a wide range of reptiles, snakes, crocodiles. They all live in the wetlands. But, you know, it's the sheer beauty that we go out there and just, you know, enjoy the colours, the formations. Just there's no other place like it out in that salt marsh. It's quiet, it's peaceful, and it's really a pretty environment. However, coastal wetlands have been threatened by deforestation for decades, including being forested for agriculture and aquaculture, urban development, harvesting for wood, and it's resulted in the loss of more than a quarter of the mangrove forest worldwide over the past 50 years. However, now that their ecological services are more valued, coastal restoration is becoming a major worldwide goal, especially due to their high rates of carbon sequestration, which is currently the most popular topic in the world. So, leading into Moreton Bay, where we sort of do a lot of work, it was listed as an internationally important wetland under the Ramsar Convention in 1993. It covers more than 120,000 hectares, and it includes a variety of habitats and environments, from freshwater wetlands, beaches, mudflats, salt marshes, mangroves, coral reefs, and seagrass beds. The bay's diversity of wetlands provide habitat to a diverse range of fishes, with the marine environment supporting a high diversity of marine mammals, including the dolphins, whales, and the dugongs. And don't forget about the turtles either, so they're in the bay. And it also supports 50,000 wetland birds, including 28 species of migratory birds, that travel around the world, feed and roost. So it's a pretty important little coastal ecosystem there. More the intertidal communities of Moreton Bay, it's estimated to be about 18,000 hectares of intertidal communities, containing compositions of mangrove salt marshes over a range of geomorphic settings. The Western Bay, more influenced by strong riverine forces and fine sediments, whereas the Eastern Bay, or the islands, influenced by oceanic coarse sandy sediments. So the coastal wetlands have been well documented through aerial mapping and surveying, such as programs of Mangrove Watch. And there's 7 species of mangroves in Moreton Bay, with Abyssinia marina and Rhizophora stylosa being the most abundant. And there's also approximately 20 species of salt marsh represented in Moreton Bay, and these occupy the higher intertidal zones. Except for mangroves haven't always been so widely protected here in Moreton Bay. In the early 1860s, the floodplains of the Logan and Pimpamar rivers were developed into agricultural pastures of sugarcane. Arrowroot was also grown, and these areas drained and removed fresh and brackish wetlands in the removed and brackish waters. In the 1930s, as you can see in the photo, mangroves were cut down and used for growing oysters around the bay, which deforested quite a large amount of area. And more recently, in the late 1980s, mangroves along the Logan River were reclaimed for sugarcane. And the southern Moreton Bay, many areas have been lost to farmland and marina developments. However, more recently, the creation of the Brisbane Airport second runway substantially killed off some mangroves, which has been reported, and some have been regrown. However, between the aerial surveys of 1955 and 2012, there was an increase in mangrove area. However, 72% of this was due to being encroachment into the salt marshes. So these environments are also, like many others on Earth, are at risk of climate change. Globally, as you know, concentrations of the major long-lived greenhouse gases in the atmosphere continue to increase, currently at the highest levels seen in 2 million years. Average air temperatures are increasing and is warming by 1 degree since the 1850s, with each decade currently being warmer than the last. And some places on Earth will soon become too hot to live, as we know, and people will possibly move to the coasts and start destroying them. Over 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction due to climate change, with more extreme and devastating weather events to occur in the future. And finally, the one that I'm interested in looking at, and what I've been following, is the global mean sea levels have risen by 25 centimetres since 1880 and are continuing to now rise at an accelerating rate. So I'll explain this a bit more easily in how they are affecting the wetlands. If our wetlands aren't able to increase the surface elevation at the same rates as sea level rise, then they're at risk of death by drowning. This can be explained in a way of accreting sediments, in a vertical way, as the infrastructure, as we know, is usually in the way of our lateral landward movements. The mangrove growth also influences rates of soil surface elevation gains, which is important for the maintenance of their position on the intertidal zone. Over the long term, these enable them to avoid being inundated by sea level. So if we add on our future sea level rise by 2100 of approximately at least half a metre, if our mangroves on the lower lying fringe do not increase their surface elevation, then pneumatophores that allow them to breathe the air will be permanently underwater and therefore risk the death, and it's called by drowning. So we're looking at the fact that how can they increase their elevation in the lateral movement, because in many of these areas, as you know, there's roads or infrastructure, buildings, houses, all in the way of their possible lateral movements. So before I tell you how we measure surface elevation, the underground reasoning why we do this is, again, for the resilience of the wetlands to sea level rise. It also provides data for estimating soil carbon, which as I mentioned before, is currently a very big topic. And with measuring surface elevation, we're usually monitoring tree growths and root growths, which form relevant to assessing the ecosystem functions and biomass productions of habitats and areas that we're looking at. So the processes by which coastal wetlands maintain soil surface elevation includes the physical processes of sediment accumulation, which is deposited when tides and currents deliver sediments, and the below ground biological processes of root production, which are the two ones that I've circled there in red. However, there are other processes that influence surface elevation, like the litterfall, and decrease them, like compaction of the sediment. However, the two of sediment accretion and root production have been, they're particularly important, and they're the most likely and the most common reasons why they can increase their surface elevation. And both of these processes vary among sites, climates, and it's also affected by groundwater. And there is measurements that you can take that you can see the surface elevation change through evapotranspiration throughout the time of the day. So this brings us to how do we measure our coastal wetlands' ability to maintain its position within the increasing landward tidal range. And yes, Julia, this is where the planks come into it. So we use this precise measuring device that is attached to a permanent benchmark. And now the benchmark is a series of stainless steel rods that's hammered down and embedded into the bedrock, where we attach a receiver to the top and cement it off at the top on the surface. So, and these are the sort of what you can see on the right is just what's left on the ground after we've embedded this stainless steel rods. And yes, we use a platform so we don't disrupt the surface, because that's what we're going to be measuring and you don't want to touch it. So how do we get these benchmarks down? Possibly at least 15 meters in some areas. So as you can see there, way back in 2007, we just use a slide hammer. Slowly and surely, we're banging these down. Takes a while, 300 plus hits for the last one, if not more. And then, you know, many of us take turns to keep hammering in, while balancing on a platform or a bench. However, recently we took a different method and decided to try this hammer drill, which has taken the backbreaking out of it. So we just sort of lean on it and use the power of the hammer drill to guide these down. And it takes a long time. So it's not the simplest task. Walking along seagrass beds or entering at the high tide, carrying bags of gear that might contain 20 kilos of cement, or a plank that's, you know, you're trying to weave in and out of the mangroves. And not to mention that we're trying to dodge mangrove holes while we can't see what we're walking on, or branches or other obstacles that, you know, are in these environments, or, you know, sinking while walking with heavy equipment. So it's not for the faint-hearted. So when we come to measure the surface elevation, we attach this mobile receiver arm onto the platform. We take off the cap, and this just fits into that. And the arm consists of a leveling bubble and 9 fiberglass pins, which once we level the arm, we drop them to the surface, which is predicted upon the reader. So this is all reader specific, and I've been doing this now for 14 years. And the length of the pin protruding, once I've lowered them to the surface, is just measured to the nearest millimeter with a metal ruler. And that's our surface elevation. And so during the measuring, we take any notes of surface level, any obstructions, pneumatophores or tree roots, woody debris, crab burrows or mounds, or landing on the stem of a plant. So we take those measurements, emit them from the data set, and redo it again. So we do 4 cardinals at each benchmark, and then those 36 measurements are averaged to produce 1 measurement for each benchmark. And then they're averaged again for each site. So this methodology is now used in over 20 countries and 6 continents. and they're placed in a range of coastal wetland ecosystems to solve a vast range of research questions. These range from the surface elevation effects in mangroves after destructive hurricanes and extreme weather events of wind. We also look at the changes of surface elevation following nutrient additions and sedimentation, and of course, elevation changes between neighbouring communities like mudflats and mangroves, or mangroves and salt marshes, or mudflats and salt marshes. And with the onset of climate change-induced sea level rise, there's an interest in the future survival of wetlands, and this methodology is becoming more widely used, with more of these benchmarks being installed weekly almost around the globe. The method is also commonly used, it's also coupled with this marker horizon. So upon our installation of the benchmark, we sprinkle this white powder over a 50 centimetre square area, which is, it's a white feldspar powder, which is a pottery powder. And we come along and we can take modified syringe cores. So just we pull up an area, as you can see, and you can still see the white powder, and we just measure the amount of accretion that's on top or all the way around the syringe. And that's coupled with the surface elevation from the benchmark. So the first example I explained was a surface elevation table from a benchmark, and then we measure the marker horizon, which is the accumulation of sediment on the surface. We also at some point measure below ground root growth, as this is one of the major factors that affect surface elevation. And so it depends on the type of mangroves around, depending on what you're going to find in the root bags or how quickly they grow. So Avicennia have a cable root that's just believed to stay along the surface and anchoring on the underside and protruding through the surface layer. And these are the pneumatophores, which supply the oxygen to the trees. There's the Rhizophyra type, which have the prop roots and are also believed to anchor down at each point of surface contact. And therefore, it would make a difference as to what root production you'd have, as to what species you'd have in the area. So we measure these in root bags, which are just shade cloth, zip tied at each end with a specific root-free medium in them. And then after 6 months or 18 months, depending on what you're looking for, you pull the root bags out and finally wash them through a fine sieve. And yeah, we find all these roots and we compare them for each site. So getting to our study, in 2007, we identified 6 locations that were away from human interference and accessible so that we could install these series of road surface elevation tables. And these are located at Tinchitamba wetlands in the north and Nudgee Beach. Sorry, it's just Nudgee behind the Boondah wetlands there. And further south, we have them at Point O'Halloran Reserve against the Proper Creek. And on North Stradbroke Island, there's one site at Adams Beach, and then there's 2 sites a little distance away from each other up at Amity Point. So we have 6 locations in Moreton Bay. And each of these have 6 benchmarks at them. There's 3 in the mangroves as replicates and 3 in the salt marsh. And these locations were also picked as they also have the developed salt marsh behind the developed mangroves. And there isn't that many areas in Moreton Bay that have that developed salt marsh and mangrove that are also easy to access and haven't been, you know, we can get to them when we need to. So the nitty-gritty, here's the what we've discovered over the last 14 years is that the surface elevation is increasing. And in some cases, like Adams Beach and Amity, it's increasing by 7.5 centimetres in the last 14 years. So I've got North Stradbroke lines on the top there, and our mainland sites on the bottom. Our mangroves are in the blue, where the shaded lines just standard area of the three benchmarks, and then our salt marshes in the green. And I've added a line of sea level rise of 2 mil a year, which is what it's been previously. And as you can see, they are keeping pace with sea level rise, which means that they are growing laterally. And I guess it's good news. And it's sort of what we were expecting with that sort of thing. On a sort of a very, to sum it up in the bay, the difference of the bay side. So the surface elevation on North Stradbroke Island is increasing at a much higher rate than it is on the mainland. Mainly might be due to the turbidity of the water, the turbidity of the currents, also the sedimentation rates higher on North Stradbroke Island. There's the sediment courses, and as well as the root productions and tree growth and all that sort of extra stuff. And the salt marshes aren't increasing surface elevation as quickly, but they're higher in the intertidal. So this isn't, it is to be expected that those rates will be lower than the mangroves. So we've also been measuring tree growth. So at our 6 rod surface elevation sites, we've placed tree bands around 5 trees of each species. So that's 15 trees of each species at each site. And the band's just a metal stainless steel band that's kept in place with a tension spring. And upon installing, we just mark against the collar, which is the starting point. And then as the tree grows, the spring releases a little bit, and you can just measure with calipers how quickly the trees are growing. So most of these trees were started with a DBH of between 10 to 20 centimeters. And yeah, the growth of the trees is quite variable at each site. However, the Rhizophora have a clear higher growth rate than Abyssinia in most areas. And they are again growing faster on North Stradbroke Island, which sort of might indicate why surface elevation's higher over there. Tree growth rates are also influenced by nutrients of the soil and can be influenced by competition and space, light availability, and especially their geological location. However, the biggest factor known to affect mangrove tree growth is rainfall. And this is some data from some electric dendrobans that we used in Yandina and Marucci. And the black line there shows you rainfall for the month. And as you can see, the blue lines, which is a young developing forest, is clearly following the higher growth rates with higher rainfall. This is a common record and a common result from a lot of areas using this, but it is interesting to actually see just how much they do follow rainfall. And you might say that rates of these, what are these rates compared to terrestrial? Well, I pulled some terrestrial growth rates from a large study of long-term data sets, and our average annual circumference growth rates are, slightly lower than most terrestrial areas. So yeah, they're a small, guided, interesting little area. So just a few little interesting things that happen in the mangroves. They're quite special and unique, but they take a hit, especially from the flooding that's just happened. The first picture there on the left, as you can see the river, that's from the Brisbane River, and the mangroves are starting to die off and lose their leaves from being inundated for 3 days, which means that the pneumatophores haven't been able to breathe oxygen, and the trees have just lost their leaves and died. But as you know, they do come back after the 2011 flood. But the silt buildup is also pretty big in that area, which in the middle there, we went down after the recent flood and measured 19 centimeters of silt, which is usually a very hard on low tide, and there's no extra silt in there, but it was quite sloppy and it's very hard. So that also will bring issues to our mangroves. The final picture here is from our Marucci, sort of a study area at Marucci, where I had a data logger in that area throughout the flood, and it recorded 2.5 meters of water over these small mangroves for a duration of 11 days. And we've come up 2 months later and found that they're all very frail and dead. So there's no life at all in any of those metaphors, which again isn't great news, and these extreme weather events are killing our intertidal. Strong winds and strong tides also affect these areas. So one of our study sites, this is actually Point Halloran, the first picture on the left. That's a very large Abyssinia that has split in three, following some strong rainfall and winds in March last year. And the smaller tree on the right is in the middle of Moreton Bay. The strong tides of January, the first week of January, has taken down that tree. The manifolds are still alive in that area and haven't quite died yet. So where are we doing now? So I've got to tidy up this data and look for and publish it, which might end up in a special edition of a journal. We're continuing to measure these annually still. These benchmarks are permanent, and as I say to Professor Lovelock, we'll be measuring these when we're almost carped and dead, but they can be measured forever. And this data is also useful for long-term measuring models. There's only 4 other long-term over 10-year data sets of surface elevation throughout the world. So this one will add to that long-term literature, which will be great for people that are interested. And I've also got another interest going for another PhD chapter, looking at the importance of these ancient Abyssinia mangroves, which came apart following the death of the fall of the large Abyssinia last year. So we're looking at the distribution of these very large trees, and I'm talking about the largest of large, and where they're distributed, and then trying to figure out why they're still standing there compared to not on the Brisbane River. So yeah, we're on the hunt, and the more people we get on the hunt and helping us out, the better. It's a big job sort of measuring and locating these. And especially we're looking at the importance of the hollows. And so the hollows under mean sea level sort of have crabs. Most of them have got crabs inside. And the crabs above mean sea level are utilised by bats and birds, especially those smaller ones. So just a little, what you could do, in the mangroves and the salt marshes is just admire them. Some people use them as rubbish dumps, but these areas just need to be left for nature. And yeah, I thank you for listening.
Thanks, Vicky. That's really interesting. So are you also looking at whether the mangroves are encroaching upon the salt marshes as well and reducing? There's that whole landward shifting of salt marshes and mangroves. Are you looking at that at all?
Yeah, so that comes in with the long-term measuring projects. So you can also, it's predicted that the mangroves will encroach on the salt marshes. And for instance, like at Tinchitamba, we've been in and out of that area annually for 14 years, and you can tell that we can't see our salt marsh sites anymore, whereas we used to at the start. So we're not aerially taking notes, but you can just visually see that it is encroaching. The mangroves are encroaching on the salt marsh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a question for you. Terry has asked, how successful is mangrove restoration in areas where it has been undertaken? Depends on the methodologies that are used, I'd say.
So I can't say I'm an expert in that field. We're looking at, so another part of surface elevation studies is happening at Yandina in the Blue Heart location. And so we're also measuring surface elevation changes occurring in the new area that's about to be tidally reintroduced. So it was introduced and we're just measuring how that's going with the reference site. I would say that plantations, you just need to have the right currents and the right propagules coming in. But yeah, the rates of restoration aren't great globally. But I think more scientific knowledge is needed for them to actually get better restoration rates.
Okay. So I think they actually did some in the Palmerston Passage down near the Cadet Club, and I don't think that was very successful. It was only a very small area.
Yeah, it's not particularly my area of expertise, but I'd say yeah, it's mainly because people just hope for luck, or put in some young propagules and hope that they survive, but they haven't actually ensured that the sediment's all right, that there's available water, that they're not just going to get inundated too much by high waves. And yeah, but the success rates are very, very low.
Okay. Katrina's great talk. What was happening with the surface elevation for mangroves at the Tichy site? It looks like it was going down.
It is unfortunately going down. We haven't quite pinpointed what has made this to go down. There has been a few tree deaths in the area, which of course then the roots die off underground, which causes it all to subside. So we are predicting and believe this is what's happened, but we haven't actually been able to pinpoint it exactly. But unfortunately, yeah, it's Tinchy's a bit of our where we've placed these benchmarks to start with are up one of the side channels, and it's a bit higher in the intertidal, but it still doesn't explain it. And yeah, something that in the next few months we're looking into why it's gone down. But still is, yeah, at the moment it looks like it's just from a few tree deaths.
Okay. Does anybody else have any more questions? I think it's fascinating that the growth at Stratty is higher than it is on the mainland.
Yeah,
and will get smashed more over there than.
Yeah, they get smashed a lot, but they also grow very well too. So it's very much the Rhizophora. Okay. Over there, the smaller prop roots mangroves, and they're taking over the Abyssinia, which is to be expected with climate change as well.
Is that because of the root system?
No, it's more the Rhizophora are able to live in the as it's getting warmer, they're more of a northern warmer species, and so they can tolerate the area a bit better.
Okay.
And they have the quicker growth rate. So Abyssinia are the pioneers, and they settle the area, and then the Rhizophora are able to come in and colonize it better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay, so we don't have any more questions. You obviously answered everybody's questions during the talk, so that's really good. Okay, well, no one's got any questions. We might leave it there. Stop this recording.